Greetings, listeners. You're tuning in to Sinister Soup, an audio imprint of Grendel Press for lovers of everything dark and delicious. I'm your host, Clay Vermulm. We hope you enjoy today's story and remember to stay tuned afterwards for a featured interview with the author. See you on the other side. Morning Glory by Tianna, Ebnet. Though the spider had no eyes, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that it was looking at her. It hung over the door, an embossed placard serving as the closest thing this shop had to a name. The legs curved outwards beyond the edges of the sign, and Nora felt a sudden urge to reach out and trace the cool metal lines with her fingertips. If only they weren't out of reach. The shop looked out of place in this tiny strip mall. Most of the stores were closed, likely unable to compete with big box stores and the internet. There was a nail salon, a pet supply store, Starbucks, and a CVS. But the red and white paint of the CVS ended abruptly where it met the borders of the shop, making its exposed brick look older and dingier. The doors and windows were outlined in black, curling metal similar to the design of the sign, giving the place an antique feel. The store could be selling anything, gardening equipment to leather pants and sex toys. A quick Google search revealed nothing. No social media pages or Yelp reviews. As far as the internet was concerned, the strip mall ended with CVS. It was probably new, Nora thought. Nora had 2 hours to kill before she had to pick her little sister up from the airport. Emily had taken a spur-of-the-moment trip to Florida with a college friend, but the flight back had been delayed. She had been planning on sitting in Starbucks and scrolling on her phone until Emily called, but there was a sense of mystery to this little shop that drew Nora's hand over the doorknob and pulled her inside. Her presence was preceded by chimes on the door hinge, an old assortment of silver and black metal cut out into zigzagging patterns mixed with smooth white pieces, shells or perhaps stones. They clattered together in a discordant melody. The interior contrasted sharply with the artfully worn storefront. The floor was checkered black and white tiles, and the room was sectioned off by a long black desk preceding a number of stools. Nora noticed long black tables past the desk, spaced out evenly and separated by rice paper screens. Every spare section of the wall was covered in art. Wild, sprawling designs, sketches in every shape imaginable, from abstract intersecting lines and tribal symbols to more concrete images like birds and flowers. But there were no colors, only black ink on white paper that seemed to bleed together and move the longer Nora looked. She was standing, Nora realized, in a tattoo parlor. The store was empty of customers. Peak hours were probably on weekends, prime time for new 18-year-olds to forever imprint themselves with flowers, hearts, grinning skulls. Welcome. The voice, oil sliding over water, seemed to hook in the heart. It belonged, Nora saw, to a woman sitting at the desk. She looked like she belonged, blended into the environment with her relaxed posture as she leaned back in her chair. She was tall and long-limbed, her legs stretching out under her desk, with thick black hair tied in a loose braid. But what truly drew Nora's eye was her skin, every inch tattooed. Nora heard that tattooing could be addictive. People rarely stopped at one, and a tattoo artist in particular were often bulletin boards for their profession. But she'd never seen a tattoo like this, for it was, as far as Nora could tell, one single work. The lattices of a web stretched from the woman's neck down her chest, curling around her arms and legs, which were exposed in her black tank top and shorts. Trailing strands curled around her cheeks, making the bones there sharper and framing her eyes in permanent eyeliner. The color even seemed to seep into her eyes, dyeing the cornea and making her gaze a solid inky black. The only deviation Nora could spot was a small black spider subtly worked into the web, resting just above her breast. As hard as Nora tried not to stare, her eyes always strayed back to the inky arachnid. The tattoo seemed to shift as the woman moved, an illusion of the repeating patterns probably. How many hours had she spent under the needle to achieve those intricate lines? "Are you the owner of the store?" Nora asked. The woman's lips curved. I am the spider. Are you the fly? Nora flushed. No, I was just looking. There was something dangerous in the woman's amused, assessing gaze. Captivating, too. An electric compulsion that made Nora want to run away and come closer all at once. Were you interested in getting inked? Spider asked. She rose, approaching Nora and putting a hand on her cheek. Spider had to lean forward slightly to meet Nora's eye, and she could see the lines of the web curving under her shirt collar. You have lovely skin for it. Nora brushed her hand off and took a step back. I've never thought about it. That wasn't strictly true. Nora had thought about it, briefly, in college. But she'd worried about permanence, about future regrets, about what her parents would say if they saw their responsible eldest daughter do something foolish. You're supposed to be an example. So she'd never gotten the nerve. Spider nodded, gesturing to the walls. Well, take a look around. I have a feeling something will inspire you. I should leave, Nora thought. Get away from this strange woman with her cryptic statements, ignorance of social boundaries, and spooky Instagram-worthy aesthetic. But she couldn't deny that she was curious about the designs on the walls. They were difficult not to look at. There didn't appear to be discernible frames around the prints, and the white backgrounds blended together seamlessly. The designs seemed to feed into each other, making her eyes swim, the details distorting. Nora felt like she was standing in one giant tattoo. Still, one design in particular caught her eye, perhaps because it was smaller than the others. It was a single curling vine with a few tiny leaf shoots that just barely taken root. She found herself lost in the details, the whorls and texture of the vine, the tiny veins in the leaves. She reached out to touch the pattern. The paper around it, was it paper? Was dry and leathery. But the pattern itself seemed almost fluid to the touch. It stuck to Nora's fingers as she pulled away, rising to meet her skin, and she was surprised that no residue remained. Seems like you found a connection, Spider said, nearly resting her chin on the curve of Nora's shoulder. Nora hadn't heard her walk up, had no way of knowing how long she'd been standing there, close enough to kiss, close enough that Nora thought she could see the inky spider tattoo crawling up her neck to vanish beneath her jawline. Spider smiled, the movement of her lips rippling the web, and Nora found herself unable to move away. Would you like to get under my needle? Nora had nearly forgotten about the tattoo, about anything other than the solid black pits of Spider's eyes. Her lips parted, and she would have agreed to anything at all. Her phone vibrated. Nora blinked and took a step back. Sorry, just a second. It was her mother, asking if Emily's flight had landed safely. Emily hadn't told her about the delay, and her mother likely didn't even ask. It was Nora's responsibility to coordinate details, to plan, to organize. She was the steady one, the safe choice. She was tired of being steady. Safe. Nora typed a quick reply and glanced at the clock. Still plenty of time before she needed to be at arrivals, especially if she factored in how long it would take Emily to go through baggage claim. Her eyes strayed back to the vine sketch. This one, she found herself saying. I want this one. The next moment, Nora was seated at the tattoo chair. Spider didn't ask Nora where she wanted the tattoo, nor had she taken the sketch off the wall. She seemed to know what Nora wanted without communicating, outlining the vine on her right pinky finger in perfect free hand. Spider pulled out a fresh needle. It's clean, she said, showing Nora the sealed package. She then took out a small black toolbox. It was lined with soft white cloth, with tattooing implements arranged neatly inside. Nora knew little about the tools of the trade, but the tattoo machine was beautiful, bright silver with intricate geometric patterns inlaid into the metal. Spider loaded the needle and took out a small pot with the same geometric patterns as the machine, except the surface was clear. Nora could see the ink inside, and it seemed to move, tiny black ripples and waves on the surface, but went still when Nora blinked. Just close your eyes, Spider suggested as she turned the machine on, filling the air between them with soft humming. Nora didn't want to close her eyes. She wanted to watch the tattoo take shape, but she found her lids drooping the second the needle hit her skin. She expected it to hurt, knew there should be some kind of sting as the ink was injected, but instead, she felt a sort of tingling, the same liquid sensation as when she first touched the pattern. Then the feeling seemed to solidify. It felt like the brush of leaves, like burrowing her fingers into the dirt. Even the smell was cool and earthy as the ink took root. Then suddenly, it was over, and Nora had a new vine twining around her finger. Pretty, Nora murmured. She had to restrain herself from touching, allowing Spider to wipe the leaking ink mixed with blood from the design. How do you feel? Spider asked, her breath warm against Nora's cheek. The crook of Spider's neck smelt like Nora's ink, earthy, but slightly sweeter like crushed blackberries. Nora felt the urge to bury her nose in it and breathe deep, directly on the spider now perched behind the artist's ear. Nora shook her head and drew back. She felt strangely lightheaded, as if she just donated blood and now needed cookies and juice. I don't know, it doesn't hurt, it's tingly, I guess? A little numb? That'll pass, Spider assured her as she bandaged the area. It'll need to be kept healthy. I'm sure care won't be an issue. Nora nodded and stood up, steadying herself against the arms of the chair as she was hit with a wave of dizziness. Now that the excitement of tattooing had passed, the uneasiness in Nora's chest had returned. She felt like she wanted to stay here forever in the same moment as she longed to leave. But Spider made no move to stop her exit, waving Nora out cheerfully. I'll see you soon. Nora stopped at the door. I don't plan on coming back. Spider laughed, making Nora feel suddenly very young and foolish. Trust me, they always find a way home. When she left the tattoo parlor, Nora found several text messages from Emily. She'd been under the needle far longer than she thought. Who would have thought a small tattoo could take nearly 3 hours? Emily was standing in the airport with her suitcase and wondering where her ride had wandered off to. They met at baggage claim. Sorry I'm late, Nora said, pulling her sister into a hug. No worries, Emily assured her. Our plane just landed. They delayed us 3 times. Can you believe it? I think the gate attendant was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I'm glad you got home safe. What about Lori? Did she get a ride? Nora asked. Her boyfriend picked her up. We're good to... Nora, what did you do to your hand? Emily was reaching for Nora, inspecting the bandage. Are you hurt? Nora felt a flare of irritation, an inexplicable defensiveness as she wrenched her hand away. I'm fine, she said. Emily's eyes widened, her hands still hovering in place. I'm fine, Nora repeated, forcing her voice into an even tone. It was embarrassing to admit, but Emily was going to find out eventually. I got a tattoo. You did what? Are you serious? Emily asked. Yeah, I am. While I was waiting for you, I found this tattoo parlor, and I don't know, I always wanted one. I just never had the nerve. It was an impulse. Nora cupped her bandaged fingers protectively. An impulse? Emily asked. You? Did you also get a lobotomy while I was gone? Am I not allowed to make impulsive decisions now? Nora demanded. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you held the monopoly. Emily took a step back, holding her hands up, palms out as if to shield herself. Wow, I'm sorry, I was just surprised. No need to bite my head off. Look, if you're happy with it, that's all that matters. Is it pretty at least? Can I see? The tension in Nora's chest relaxed, replaced with a faint guilt. In a couple hours, Nora promised, after I take the bandages off. I'll hold you to that. I'm hungry, let's go home. They walked to the car, Emily sliding into the passenger seat. Do we need to stop on the way to buy anything for the aftercare, or did the artist give you something? Nora's hand faltered as she turned the key in the ignition, making the car stutter in protest before it came to life. Aftercare? Yeah, to keep it clean so it doesn't get infected. Different artists recommend different things, Emily said. I don't remember what she said exactly, Nora admitted. I was distracted. As Nora navigated the curves of the parking ramp, Emily's lips split into an impish grin. Distracted, huh? Was she cute? I will leave you here. You can live out your days as a ramp hobo, sleeping in cars and living off Cheetos you find under the seats. Gross, you need to be nice to me, or else I won't share my wisdom from all my tattoos, Emily said. All right, what do you suggest? As an expert, Nora asked. Clear soap, unscented. Luckily, we have some at home. And for the love of God, when it flakes, do not pick. Home was their shared apartment. Nora used to live by herself, but Emily moved in once she outgrew the college dorms. It was a modest 2-bedroom, but the constant clutter made it look tiny. Neither sister liked tidying, so the mess tended to pile up until it finally hit a tipping point, and one of them, usually Nora, snapped and went on a cleaning spree. The air smelled like stale coffee and dirty dishes, scents that Nora never noticed until she'd been away for a length of time. Emily took her bags to her room before digging around in the fridge for a snack. Nora took her bandages off the moment the 2 hours were up, allowing Emily to ooh and ah over the creeping vine and delicate leaves. Exposing the tattoo was a relief. It felt wrong to have it constrained, like it needed air or sunlight. Nora took care to keep it clean and moisturized. She even managed to take Emily's advice and resist the urge to pick at the dry, healing skin. But despite all her care, the subtle tingle refused to fade. At first, Nora attributed it to tenderness, then to itching that was to be expected when scabs started to flake. But the feeling didn't fade when the ink finally smoothed over into skin. In fact, it only got worse. "Maybe you should go to the doctor," Emily said. "It could be infected." Nora was reluctant. There were no signs of redness or bumpy skin. The vines felt smooth and perfect, and it didn't hurt. Exactly. The tingle felt like a limb falling asleep, like growing pains. But she was forced to concede when the finger became difficult to move. She sat in the waiting room. Everything seemed loud. The rapid clicking of the keyboard as the receptionist typed, the turn of the magazine pages, the scratch of pens against paper as patients filled out insurance forms. The room was too hot, too cramped, too chemical. Nora needed to get out, needed sunlight. She ran from the room, just as her name was called. She didn't go back. She adjusted. It was easier living without her left pinky than she would have expected. She was right-handed, she could still handle pens and utensils, and she learned to type with only 9 fingers. Nora had found that water also helped quell the tingling's intensity. If she kept the tattoo moist, there was only a vague feeling of pins and needles that she barely noticed anymore. It was only when she was at work handing back legal documents that her boss asked, "When did you get a tattoo?" It should have been small enough to go unnoticed unless someone was specifically looking for it. She'd chosen the size by design. A little secret, just for her. But when Nora glanced down, she found that additional vines had begun to sprout and crawl up her knuckle. "It's new. I've only had it a month," Nora said, pulling her hand onto her lap, out of sight. "Well, be careful. They say once you get one, you only want more." "I don't care, personally, but some of our clients are more conservative." Nora clenched her fingers under the desk. "I'll keep that in mind." Her finger was pulsing, a deep throb, but there was no pain. She was seeing things. It couldn't be growing. Black dashes of permanent marker began to join the collection of ink on Nora's arm. She would make notches and watch the vines swallow them every few weeks with curved leaves and looping vines. In a month, the ink had overtaken her entire hand, spread down her wrist like henna. She found she couldn't wear long sleeves, for the tattoo seemed to writhe beneath the fabric. Her arm felt dead, like it was wrapped in heavy material, making it awkward and clumsy. The internet offered no help. She scoured tattoo forums, learned about tattoo blowout, the disasters that occurred when a needle went too deep, and the way tattoos could stretch as the skin wrinkled and expanded, but nothing matched Nora's exact problem. The best she could do was talk to the artist, but Nora couldn't find the tattoo parlor again when she looked. She found the neighborhood, but there was no little shop between CVS and the dog groomer. There wasn't even an empty store space. "Why are you looking?" Emily asked. "You thinking about getting another tattoo?" "God, no. I need answers," Nora said. "Answers? What are you talking about? This isn't exactly the kind of thing you can get a refund on." "Don't you like it anymore?" Nora pulled up her sleeves. The tattoo was nearly at her elbow. "Are you kidding? It was just my pinky, Emily. This isn't normal." Emily looked at her arm, eyes lazily following the pattern. "Hasn't it always looked like that?" Nora tried the doctor again the next day, this time for laser removal. The very act of making the appointment was a struggle as she fought feelings of reluctance and paranoia. What if he thought she was crazy? What if she was crazy? "Can you show me what we have to work with?" the doctor asked. He looked transfixed when Nora pulled up her sleeve, an expression that always seemed to come when faced with the tattoo. The vines had begun to form little buds, and Nora feared what might happen if they opened. The doctor reached out with latex fingers to stroke one of the tender shoots. Nora's arm shot out, smacking the doctor's hand away so hard he was sent reeling to one side. I'm sorry, she said, bolting from the room. She could hear the pulse of blood in her ears, coursing in tandem with the vines, tingling, writhing, growing. Her heart pounded. Every cell in her body screamed, run, run, run. The instinct didn't feel like hers. Nora stopped going to work, instead burning through her sick days in PTO. It felt like she had no other choice. She could barely feel her left arm. Moving it took effort, the fingers held no dexterity, and she couldn't explain why she wasn't able to type properly or hold things in her left hand. She spent most of her time sitting out in the front large window that technically opened up to a balcony, though they were forbidden to use it because it was not structurally sound. The sun was the one thing that relaxed her. She started getting up early in the morning just to feel those first rays. If she ever got too warm, she'd fill a basin and soak her left arm. You're going to get wrinkles before you're 30 if you keep baking like that, Emily teased, putting a hand on her shoulder. When she felt Emily's fingers against her ink, she lashed out far faster than she thought herself capable of, striking Emily across the face. For a moment, Nora and Emily simply stared at each other, astonished at what had taken place. Emily, I'm sorry, you surprised me. Come here, let me see. Emily shook her head, taking a step back. It's fine, I'm fine. Don't touch me. It was the first time her sister looked at Nora with fear in her eyes. Her left arm seemed akin to a frightened animal jerking in spasms whenever anyone tried to get near it. Not that Emily was foolish enough to try a second time. It fought her whenever Nora tried to cover it, wrestling with her right arm, bruising and scratching. The tattooed, disliked fabric and the pulse of the vine stretching and straining beneath the confinement was too terrible to bear. Emily thought she was crazy. Nora could see it in the anxious creases around her eyes, especially after she found Nora sitting in the bathtub brimming with pink-tinged water, bloody furrows in her skin and a knife in her shaking hand. It took everything she had to talk Emily out of calling 911, but she managed it. Her wounds were minor, merely crescent nail marks. She promised she wouldn't try again, and she meant it. There was no point. Her flesh was vulnerable. It bled when it was cut. It burned, but the tattoo remained pristine. Nora scratched and scratched, but the lines were still there. She sat in the bathtub for 2 hours trying to convince herself to amputate, to cut the infection at the elbow. She hadn't been able to work up the nerve, and she knew she never would. The tattoo wouldn't allow her another chance. It was growing faster now, traveling down her side as if feeding on Nora's fear. She lost her left leg, forcing Nora to drag it along in a slow, stiff hobble as she traveled the streets looking for a tattoo parlor. She did it more out of habit now. It was the only thing left to do other than watch the ink grow and spread. Every morning she'd wake up next to the window to see the buds growing fatter, distinct petals taking shape, preparing to burst open. When the infestation spread down her right leg, Nora began to black out and wake up in odd places. She'd be a few feet away from bed or in the kitchen or in the apartment lobby, her cursed hand in the middle of pushing the door open. She had to crawl her way back, her legs limp, grabbing handfuls of railing as she forced herself up the stairs, intensely thankful that Emily worked the night shift. She couldn't go to more doctors, more specialists to poke and prod. At this point, she wasn't sure what the tattoo would do. By the next night, just before dawn, she was back on the street with no memory of how she got there. No clothes, no shoes, and nothing to grab onto as her legs moved for her. Nora knew she should feel the cold, the wind on her skin, the rough gravel against her feet, but she felt nothing. The layers of ink a cushion between her and the world. She felt rather than saw the vine spreading faster now than ever. It had her rib cage, her right arm at last. She could feel it curling around her collarbone. Nora finally came to a stop in a small park to the spider's web, warping around what used to be the restrooms. She stepped into the tattoo parlor, the chime announcing her, the discordant chatter of bells and bones. Spider was sprawled on the couch, which had been turned to face the entrance. She smiled at Nora, the tattooed spider crawling across her cheek, and hoisted herself up to embrace her. Welcome, little fly. Nora tried to speak, but the ink choked her words as it spread up her neck. Shh, Spider said, stroking Nora's hair like a child. It will be over soon. Nora sat between Spider's legs on the floor, the arms around her waist gripping her with a strength Nora would have been unable to escape even if she had control of her limbs. Her vision was becoming black around the edges, and she felt as if she was melting, being sucked straight into the floor. The walls weren't white at all, Nora realized. Why had she ever thought so? They were a patchwork of fleshy tones with moles and freckles outlined in humanoid shapes like a crime scene photo. One patchwork canvas on display. The scent of warm earth filled the room. There was a golden light at her periphery, the warmth of the dawn hitting her down to the roots. The buds twitched, thin ribbons of red unfolding from the center into an explosion of blossoms, sliding sinuously against her skin and choking her with the petals. Beautiful, Nora thought, her vision swimming with liquid shadows. It's so beautiful. As a reader, and admittedly a writer too, I'm always drawn to unique takes on the supernatural, especially those grounded in real world modifications, social taboos, and the seeking of self awareness or reflection. I felt that Tiana accomplished all of that in this story. Not only is Spider a creepy character, but we also see the setting as character in the living, breathing tattoo parlor and its manifestation as Nora's first tattoo. Frightening, isn't it? How some people just don't get away with things that to many have become mundane. Here, Nora finally chances a jaunt outside her comfort zone, tries something new and novel that to many others has become status quo, and she pays the price for it. Indeed, this entire piece is a poignant take on anxiety and obsession. Nora knows she's made an irreversible decision, perhaps a mistake, perhaps a statement, but it only grows in her mind the more she feeds into it. There's a true terror in that, which so many of us out there can relate to. I also find a fascinating degree of inherent horror in the concept of tattooing in general. We allow our bodies to become an artist's canvas, our skin to become as paper, just as Nora does in this story. Now, naturally, if you trust your artist and their vision aligns with the artistic expression you desire through the form, this can be a beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong, I have tattoos, as does my wife, as does my brother, as do many of my closest friends. I love tattoos, I love the art form, but as we see in this story, there can be a dark side to it too. Just a friendly reminder to our future adventurers out there, make sure you know whose needle you're under, my friends. I'm Clay Vermulm, your narrator and producer. This has been Sinister Soup, Episode 1, Morning Glory. Sinister Soup is an imprint of Grendel Press. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. Go check out more of Grendel's work. They have a ton of awesome stuff in their digital library and new things coming out all the time. And now, as a special treat, we have an interview with our author. Enjoy. See you next month. Okay, we are here with our first Sinister Soup author interview. We are here with our author, Tianna. Tianna, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for submitting an awesome story. And we are really glad to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, you are our first author with your awesome story, Morning Glory. And I would like to just get a little bit into who you are as a person before we talk specifically about your story or you as an author. So, who are you as a person? What would you like to share with us? What can you give us as some insight into what makes you tick? What are your favorite things to do? Where you live? All those kind of cool things.
Well, I live in Minnesota, so it's cold, which is
Hmm.
that's mostly what people know about Minnesota and recently Tim Walls. So it's nice that we could share him with the world. Um, I live in an apartment with my partner and my cat. Her name is Misty, and I will go on for a long time about my cat if I'm allowed, so I'll just move past that. Um, As for who I am as a person, I have been writing pretty much my whole life. I did go to school for creative writing, which is actually the story Morning Glory was originally written for a writing workshop. That's how it came about. Um, as for what I like, what I'm interested in, I pretty much stories. My interests are pretty much engaging with anything that has a story. So podcasts, video games, TV shows. I love a good story with a lot of lore that I could dig into. I love that kind of thing.
Awesome. What are some of your favorite podcasts, movies, video games?
I um I like um so what I was kind of listening to that kind of influenced, we'll probably go into this a little later too. I was listening to the Magnus Archives. I like D&D actual play podcasts while I play D&D with my friends. Since Arcane got out, I got really into League of Legends, not the game because I don't really like battlers. I just got into the lore a lot, and there's a ton of it that's actually not really in the game, so I don't really need to play it anyway. I also really like MiHoYo's offerings, so Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact. Um, what else? Um, Also, I'm really into as a queer person myself, I'm bisexual. Queer narratives are very important to me, and specifically like a genre setting like fantasy, science fiction, where the story isn't about being gay. So anything like that, I'm gonna be interested in.
Yeah, I like those kind of narratives as well, where it's a big part of the character and it forms the character, but it doesn't have to necessarily be the central point of the whole narrative.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, that's very empowering as well in its own way. I thought Travis Baldry's books do a really good job with that. For one, James L. Sutter's most recent books, like Dark Hearts, do a really good job of that as well.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, awesome. I love all of that. And I would like to know how those interests and those particular influences work their way into your writing. How do they influence you as a writer? Not necessarily work their way into, but how do they influence you as a writer? How do they influence what sort of stories you like to tell yourself?
Well, I have a big interest in folklore.
Hmm.
That kind of thing fascinates me. So a lot of those kind of themes kind of get into my work. I had another one that I published that was supposed to be kind of like a corrupted kind of muse story that was kind of pretty similar to this one. Honestly, I definitely have a type. Uh, and So I like kind of when I go into like horror, I kind of like um sort of not like jump scares and monsters. I like more of
Hmm.
a psychological horror. Um that has just a little bit of the supernatural that kind of weaves its way in. I don't like it so much in your face. So that's my preference. I like folklore. I like mythology. So I haven't really played with that a whole lot in my work because that's a kind of a big scope, but
Hmm.
it's very something very much what I'm interested in. Um, so um, yeah, those are the type of themes I like to play with. Just a lot of lore.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, I write similar stuff. I like psychological, paranormal, especially paranormal that's sort of on the periphery with a focus around the character and how they're affected by the paranormal more than like, oh, this is about the monster. Now, don't get me wrong, I have an entire story collection of monster
Oh yeah,
creature
yeah,
features, but
yeah,
you know, these days I do tend to write similar narratives and I tend to publish those, so this all makes sense. It's all coming together, and I
yeah.
absolutely loved Morning Glory. For those of you who have not read it yet, I assume most of you will have read it or listened to it if you're listening to this. But if you haven't had the chance, go back and do so because it's an excellent story. It's about a woman who gets a tattoo, and that it is her first tattoo. She kind of does it on an impulse. She typically is very responsible and buttoned up, but she gets this tattoo kind of on a whim while she's on her way to pick her sister up from the airport. And then that tattoo starts to grow on its own. And the story goes from there. Horror happens, and it happens in a big way. I absolutely loved it. Without spoiling the story or anything, Can you talk a little bit about what inspired the story for you, where the idea came from? Was it from a specific folklore that you're a fan of or a student of? And yeah, just how did Morning Glory come to be for you? I know you said it was a college exercise.
Yeah, I was writing a short story for a college workshop. I don't necessarily love the workshop format always because especially since a lot of my well, no, quote, there were like maybe three of us that were into more of the genre stuff. And most of them were more very much literary, high-minded. So that's always kind of a struggle. I think their college is getting away from that. I mean, like the workshop, but doesn't I don't think it always works. Um uh so anyway, I was writing this for that class and it was going to be read by a bunch of people and I was going to get a lot of feedback on it. um in a way, one thing I will say about like the creative writing program is it does give you a nice time to let me write, which is nice. Not sometimes you don't get a whole lot of opportunities to do that. um but I didn't really draw on any specific folklore. I was reading Swamp Thing at the time though, so that got me really into kind of plant-based horror, and I really like tattoos. So that's pretty much like I'm just gonna combine these two things. Um, oh, cat. Sorry. Um, oh, adorable. And that's pretty much it. So like, yeah, and like I always think that tattoo parlors are very interesting spaces. I've been to a couple myself. Like I got my first tattoo myself when I was 18. It was a very dingy place. It probably would not I didn't I didn't really know what I was doing. I lucked out. My tattoo artist was good, but the guy that I almost got clearly didn't really know what he was doing, and because I was 18, I was so shy, I probably wouldn't have said anything, and the owner hadn't stepped in and noticed that he was not really on the same page with me. So, like, I guess that kind of experience of like tattoo, like it's such a kind of a strange relationship. You have to be very clear about what you want because this is going to be on your body forever. And they're very like artsy spaces. Um, and what if it goes wrong? What if it kind of takes over your life in a way that you don't expect? Was kind of where I was going, but I didn't really have all of that in mind when like this stuff comes out later. But at the time, it was like I want to do something with plants and I want to do something with tattoos, and then that just came about.
Yeah, and it came about well though. I found it interesting to think of this idea of the way it grows and kind of starts to take over her life. Again, without spoiling anything, that's sort of the where a lot of the horror is derived from in this story, is that loss of control. And it is interesting. You choose to get a tattoo. You choose to use that as a form of self-expression. But it's not just your expression; it's also the artist tattooing you's expression. And the better your artist is, the less of a say you probably have over what that looks like, ironically, like if you my wife's experiencing this now. She had a really specific idea for a tattoo she wanted at one point. Got an artist, it didn't really work out. She stopped halfway through, ended up having to get it all lasered off, right? And then she wanted to cover up what was left with a really nice sleeve, so she started going to like more higher end tattoo people to try to get something really high quality. And then those guys are like, yeah, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. You can tell me the stuff that you like, but like, I'm the artist. And then it's interesting. You can allow somebody to put something so permanent on you when it's only partly your vision. It's inspired by you, but it's ultimately someone else's art.
Yeah, it's if you get a good tattoo artist, it's not a problem. Like there's
Hmm.
communication, and you approve what you're going to be put on. It like,
Hmm.
but you have to be assertive. So if you're not, then that can be a problem. But I do think it's interesting that they call like people canvases. I find that a little dishumanizing. I don't know. If I'd want to be referred to as a human canvas, like
Hmm.
you're a person, but also you're their art, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of a strange relationship to have.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is very interesting. It's a bit symbiotic in a way.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, though. I love tattoos. I
Mm-hmm.
have like
Mm-hmm.
4. I have another one scheduled in a little while.
Oh, nice.
So, no, not down on tattoos by any means. Just to make sure that you love what you're going to put on your body.
Yeah, and make sure you find, it's just like finding an editor that works with you as an author. You have to make sure you find somebody who respects your vision for your story. And with a tattoo artist, you got to make sure you find the right artist for you. Somebody who you can have a good, honest communication with, whose style you like, and who respects you as a person, like you said. So
Exactly.
yeah, and that's equally important in story. So speaking of that, and this will be my final question for this interview. What was your mission with this story after it started to solidify? So I know you said you started with some like sort of general themes and uh, what do I want to say? Like not tropes, but motifs that you wanted to explore, such as tattoos and plant horror. You kind of had a subgenre in mind, so to speak. But what were some of the, as it started to take form, things that you want this story to tell people?
Um, I don't know. It's hard for me to kind of conceptualize it being that deep. Uh, I mean, I guess it's kind of a feeling of so this character that I created is kind of a lonely person. She doesn't really, she's kind of shy. She's kind of my 18-year-old self, although she's obviously more put together than I was when I was 18, but
Hmm.
not very assertive, kind of letting her life, not really doing what she wants with her life, just kind of doing to get by.
Hmm.
Um, and, this was supposed to be something that kind of takes ownership of who she is and who her body. And that obviously backfires.
Hmm.
Um, but I get in a way, even though it was like all this body horror and not something she wanted, it was kind of, the ending was supposed to indicate like sort of freeing. I mean, it was a destruction, but it was also beautiful. And I don't really know where I'm going with that, but that's something. I guess kind of I don't know, kind of a separation of who you want to be and who you actually are, and like kind of meeting in the middle there. Um,
That makes sense. Yeah, and she goes through sort of a metamorphosis for sure. And I think that sometimes when we find ourselves in a place of discontentment or maybe stagnation, we feel that urge to step out and try something new, to take some agency, to like get a little bit of our control back. I think that's a pretty common occurrence in the human experience across the board. Like people don't like to be suppressed, they don't like to be controlled. People like to be able to express themselves and be who they are, and learn what that actually is. And you can only do that through experience, right?
yeah,
Um, and sometimes you take those big risks, or even things that seem like small risks, like something that somebody does every day. Um, and sometimes it doesn't work out for you.
yeah.
And there's some really good horror there.
I guess I could kind of describe it as kind of like an anxiety attacks. Like you
Hmm.
do this small thing and it just starts spiraling and being bigger and bigger and bigger. Can you tell that I have social anxiety? So
Tell me
I
without
guess
telling me.
there's some there's some playing with that as well. Maybe a little bit of mental illness, coping with that might be in there.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's not something I've really thought about it right before, so it's coming to me right now as we're speaking.
Well, that's good. Audience, so I'm totally not helping Tiana out here because I did not send her questions beforehand. So that is partially on me. If I'd have sent you that question, you'd have had time to think about it. But I like talking these things through with people too, and I
Yeah.
think you get a lot of good stuff through that process.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do actually like talking things out, so that's fine.
Yeah. And I think it represents that well. Anxiety is a good way to put it, because it's like that one. It's like a little. She got this tiny tattoo on her hand, right? Which, like, getting it on your hand is a bit of a risky move, I guess. But if it's small enough, I think nobody cares really. Especially these days, I think people don't care about tattoos as much as they used to, in like
Yeah.
jobs and such. Um, but it's kind of how anxiety works. Like, there might just be this tiny little thing that you do, or this tiny conversation you had, and then you can overthink that thing, and it can get so much bigger than it actually is. And
Yeah.
that's what this tattoo literally does. And then it can start to take control of your life, because you are making choices based around those anxious feelings that might only be being perceived that way by you, or as such a big deal by you. And that's really representative of that. So I think you accomplished it, whether you meant to or not. you know and that's great too. Like, I'm glad that you were honest about that, because I think that's how a lot of writing goes. I know it goes that way for me. Like, I start with something I want to write about, and sometimes it's an idea or a concept or a theme, and sometimes it just is like, I want to do a story with this weird monster I heard of. It sounds cool, and creepy, and so I will start from there. But it always turns into something, and when you get into your writing flow state, you spill yourself on the page. So, like,
Yeah.
you did that deep work by writing, whether you like had this deeper thought process or not.
Yeah, and it was not to get too deep in it. It would what I was going through at the time, I was like kind of struggling with my anxiety. I was getting on like medication for kind of the first time, and that's great, guys. Meds are awesome. If you need them. That was definitely part of what I was grappling with. So I probably did put it in there, whether I was thinking about it or not.
Yeah, I think it puts itself in there. And I think if art matters to you, which clearly for you it does, then yourself is just going to spill into it. And just by intentionally creating art, that's going to happen. That's a natural byproduct, I think.
Mhm.
And that's where so much great art comes from. So thank you, Tianna, for contributing your art to Grendel Press and Sinister Soup. We greatly appreciate it. Before we drop off today, where can people find you? Do you have an author name you go by? Do you have some handles on social media you'd like people to follow, et cetera, et cetera? A website?
My handle is Dragon Tianna, all one word. I'm mostly active on Blue Sky. I have a X account, but I don't really use it that much anymore for obvious reasons. So if you want to find me, that's where I'm most active.
Okay, awesome. Well, we will put that in the show notes. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Sinister Soup today. We are a brand new imprint from Grendel Press for all lovers of the dark and the fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. This has been an interview with Tianna, author of Morning Glory, story number 1 for Sinister Soup 2025. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.